Guys, we are back. It's the Blue-White Breakdown, PennLive's Penn State football podcast. The bye week is over, Johnny McGonigal, and we got a lot to get to this week. It is quite a week for James Franklin and Penn State. 5-0 Penn State visiting 6-0 Michigan. Noon kick on Fox, which means Gus Johnson, I think, will be on the call with Joel Klatt. So, boy, Johnny, they've had some pretty good road tests already, but nothing quite like this one.
Yeah, Bob. I mean, it's one that we're all looking forward to. I'm sure the fans are looking forward to it. You start even watching, some playoff baseball. Here we're recording this Tuesday afternoon. The Phillies are on, and they have the graphics up. Top 10 matchup, Penn State, Michigan. It's been kind of all over the place, and there are some really big games across the board of college football this weekend. Tennessee, Alabama being one of them. But this is a big game. I mean, it's not just big for Big Ten East complications, but college football playoff rankings, those are rolling around soon, Bob, and it's a big one for James Franklin and the Nittany Lions, especially coming off the bye.
Yeah, we're going to get into all of it, but yeah, usually Johnny and I talk about our thoughts on James Franklin's Tuesday news conference. It's about 3:20 East Coast time. On Tuesday, I just got back from State College. James talked for a little over a half an hour, Johnny. Thought he had a couple of interesting things to say, but you could tell, I don't know if you could tell on the phone line, but he was a little playful, but you could tell this is a serious week for him. And, the way that he answered some of the questions, not that he wasn't forthcoming, but, he was obviously full of praise for Jim Harbaugh's team. I don't know how much he actually revealed about his team. Why don't we just start with the wide receiver room for Penn State? KeAndre Lambert-Smith, a third-year player, a big play receiver at Penn State, left the Northwestern game early, did not return. That was a couple of weeks ago, or it'll be a couple of weeks ago when, by the time Saturday rolls around. Looked an awful lot like a lower leg injury, but James isn't giving anything away. All he would really say about KeAndre is he's hopeful to have him available on Saturday. What do you make of KeAndre Lambert-Smith and Penn State's passing game to date, Johnny, especially wide receiver production? He was asked an interesting question from Mark Wogenrich of SI.com. They lost a true number one in Jahan Dotson after the 2021 season. And James was asked if he feels like he has a number one on the team. He said he actually thinks at times they have three number one wide receivers on the team. I don't know if I agree with that, but what do you think about that? Yeah,
I guess it's all, beauty is in the eye of the beholder, I suppose, when it comes to James Franklin and his players and what he's got at his disposal. With KeAndre Lambert-Smith specifically, we saw him leaving the Beaver Stadium, the rain-soaked Beaver Stadium field, with his right foot in a walking boot. And so he was James Franklin was asked about KeAndre after the press conference after the game in the press conference, and he was talking about Trey Wallace and how he would be the next guy who would step up. Yeah. But when asked today if he had a true number one wide receiver, and he said, yeah, I feel like we have three that can fill the role, and mentioned Parker Washington, Mitchell Tinsley, the Western Kentucky transfer, and then KeAndre Lambert-Smith. And he threw in there, he said, and KeAndre, who's coming back.
Yes.
That kind of sat there for a little bit, and then someone in the room followed up and asked, hey, does that mean he's going to play on Saturday? And James said, hey, we're hopeful. It's still Tuesday. It's early in the week, blah, blah, blah. But if they're able to get KeAndre back, I think they kind of need all hands on deck here when it comes to their wide receivers against this Michigan defense. A Michigan defense that's ranked inside the top 11 nationally in both run and pass defense. And I do think that there will be some opportunities for Nick Singleton and Katron Allen in the running game, especially off tackle, outside runs. But they can't be one-dimensional, the Nittany Lions. They got to be able to push the ball downfield, get some yards after the catch, which is an area that they've been seriously lacking this season. And James Franklin acknowledged that today as well. And if you're able to have KeAndre Lambert-Smith, who has struggled in recent weeks, I think he only had 4 catches in his last 4 games, or 5 catches in his last 4 games. But he showed that yak ability, at Purdue, catching that 29-yard touchdown that really broke up a series of punts in that second half at Purdue. And so he brings that pop, he brings that potential. And alongside Parker Washington and Mitchell Tinsley, if you have KeAndre out there with Trey Wallace as more of a fourth guy and Brenton Strange, et cetera, what you have in the passing game, I think you feel pretty good about the talent out there. It's just a matter of execution.
Yeah, I think, the first couple weeks of the season, I thought Penn State's skilled people, and I'm including the tight ends and Brenton Strange, they were able to really produce a lot of yak, a lot of yards after contact, yards after the catch, especially in that Purdue game. You mentioned KeAndre's, I think it was a 29-yard touchdown. That was like a 5-yard slant in the second half. And then Brenton Strange, I think the last 40 or 45 yards of his 67-yard touchdown right before the end of the first half was all after he shook off 2 tacklers. That really has not been, I think, really something that Penn State has been able to count on of late. And I think, other than Brenton Strange's big play, that's something I think that's kind of been missing. Not all of it is the wide receivers' fault. They have been open. Sean has missed, I think, too many wide receivers. He missed Parker Washington for a huge play against Northwestern in the rain, but that's not an isolated incident, right? He's had some chances to find some wideouts down the field. He had a big throw to Mitchell Tinsley early in the Auburn game that really kind of loosened up, I thought, Auburn's defense. But when you talk about consistency and you talk about how many chances against Michigan's defense are you really going to have for chunk plays in the passing game, I think it's going to be a limited number. Sean cannot afford to miss open receivers in this game on Saturday. And James even kind of acknowledged that when asked about Sean today, that he'd like to have some plays back. I think he'd like to have more than a few plays back, especially the last couple of weeks. So I think when we look at the wideout room and the production, I think you have to take into consideration that Sean has missed some plays, but they gotta be on their toes against this Michigan defense.
Yeah, I mean, look, this Michigan front seven doesn't have Aiden Hutchinson or David Ojabo anymore. Yeah. It's still a fearsome front. It's a front that can get after you in the passing game. And so those opportunities to take shots downfield, I feel it will be few and far between. Yeah. Even though we're confident and have been impressed with what Olu Fashanu has done at left tackle and Landon Tengwall at left guard, and even Juice Scruggs as well, and Sal Wormley on the inside. But so that'll be a test for Penn State's offensive line to hold up in pass pro. But then it's up to Sean Clifford. It really comes down to him, and it's a combination of him hitting his guys when they're open, and they have been open on occasion. You mentioned that Parker Washington miss in the fourth quarter against Northwestern, and that was just it was such a bad throw. I mean, just you got to say what it was, right? And that's what it was. And I think Mitchell Tinsley has done a nice job of contested catches. If you just give that guy a chance in one-on-one coverage, I think you have to take those opportunities against Michigan, loosen that defense up if you can. I think it's going to be a low-scoring game on Saturday, and really one of those plays can be the turning point. And so having a KeAndre Lambert-Smith and his experience out there, his ability to catch one and, like you said, bounce off a would-be tackler and get some more yards after the catch, getting Parker Washington involved early, and giving Mitchell Tinsley those opportunities when he has them, I think is imperative for Mike Yurcich, the offensive coordinator, and Sean Clifford against his Michigan defense.
Yeah, and having you when they played last year at Beaver Stadium, you were doing a fantastic job covering those Pitt Panthers at your former location. I took in I'm sure you might even have watched the Michigan game after it happened, but it was savage destruction at the line of scrimmage by Michigan's front. Aiden Hutchinson and Ojabo absolutely toyed with Penn State's offensive tackles, Rasheed Walker and Caden Wallace, and that really was the story of the game. I mean, Penn State's defense played well enough to win, but they gave up a busted play late that actually got them beat for a long touchdown when 2 defensive backs collided and a tight end got loose on a crossing route for the winning touchdown. But really the storyline was Michigan ran the ball down their throat, and those defensive ends and the rest of Michigan's front completely overwhelmed Penn State's offensive line. Penn State's offensive line is better this year. You can't convince me, Johnny. Otherwise, a lot of it has to do with Olu's development, Fashanu's development on the left tackle side. And I think that Juice Scruggs, as the permanent center, has been a significant upgrade over former Penn State center Mike Miranda. They like what Sal Wormley has done. I think Landon Tengwall has gotten better. I'm just gonna call it for what it is. If I'm the Michigan defensive coordinator, Jesse Minter, I think he's the son of former Cincinnati coach Rick Minter. I'm taking a good hard look at Penn State's right tackle position. And I'm probably going to go after Caden Wallace, especially in obvious passing situations. Penn State can help him. with a tight end, Brenton Strange, or whoever they want to do it. But I think there's going to be some times where Caden Wallace is going to be isolated against a good edge rusher, and he's going to have to play one of his better games at Penn State. I think, especially on the road in front of that crowd. I think that's a big key. I think to what we're going to see Saturday, Johnny, in Ann Arbor, and especially if Penn State falls behind. Maybe they won't. Maybe you'll have that comfortable lead like they built, after 2+ quarters at Auburn, and they're not going to need to really go back and throw it 35 times. But if they have to, I think that's a real area of concern, and I think the Michigan coaching staff's aware of it.
Yeah, I agree. Looking at that right tackle spot, I think you're going to see a lot of Brenton Strange lined up on the right side to help out Caden Wallace. I think you're going to have the running backs whenever they're in pass pro, especially Kevon Lee, the oldest of the 3 running backs, helping out on that right side. And that was, when I went back and I rewatched every game from last season, because I was able to a couple of them, whether the timing, lined up or, Pitt played on a Thursday or what have you. But I went back and rewatched all of them. That Michigan game, like you said, it was carnage off the edge, from a defensive perspective for Michigan, getting after the quarterback and living in the backfield of Penn State. And on the other end, too, is their offensive line really dominating up front. And we talked about what I'm looking at that right tackle spot for Penn State. I'm also looking at the interior defensive line for Penn State. We just saw what P.J. Mustipher, Hakeem Beamon did against Northwestern a couple weeks ago. Northwestern is not Michigan, right? Michigan is a different animal, especially with Blake Corum at running back. All he needs is a little bit of space. If you give him a yard, pass or 2 past the line of scrimmage, and you give him a glimmer of hope, that guy can duck under, duck around, spin through, and just hit the open field and go for 50. Mm-hmm. So I think it really comes down to the Penn State's front 7, and specifically Mustipher and Hakeem Beamon. Yeah. The ends too, right? The ends holding up in run support. But, if those 2 guys in the middle are able to really clog those lanes and force, J.J. McCarthy into uncomfortable situations, behind the sticks, after first and second down, 3rd and long, because, James Franklin, one of the things he really harped on during his press conference today was how good Michigan has been on first down as an offense. And that has made life easy on J.J. McCarthy, who, at 78% leads the country in completion percentage. 78%. That's unreal, Bob. And look, going back and watching some of his, he's not like being forced to carry this team. A lot of it is they're using his mobility, rolling him out, off play action, a lot of easy access throws. And I'm sure Michigan's going to want to try and get him in that rhythm again against this Penn State defense. But that's up to the secondary to hold firm, and then really for this interior defensive line to do its job.
Yeah, I agree. James was asked about JJ. He mentioned his arm talent, and he also mentioned the fact that the completion percentage, but he also said more than once, right, Johnny? He said more than once, Michigan has been really good at kind of staying ahead of the chains. And what he means is, I think, if they get 5 yards on first down and they get 4 on second down, when it's third down, and they're completing like it's in the, I think, the mid to high 40s on third down, but a lot of times it's third and very short. And when you have those tight ends in that big offensive line, and you have Blake Corum, who if he's healthy, he's going to get it. Unlike Auburn, Michigan will stay with that run, and he's going to get it 25 to 30 times. And he can be very, he's one of those guys, Johnny, he's not small, he's short, but he's powerfully built. He's like 5'8", 210.
He's like compact.
There's nothing. He's actually kind of built like Parker Washington, but there's nothing small about this young man. He is a force between the tackles, and if you give him space, you're going to really struggle to run him down. It's a fascinating matchup. You mentioned Mustipher, Hakeem Beamon, the defensive ends. I think another area that James was asked about was the linebackers today, right? And I think about that, the middle linebacker play, right? Whether it's Elston or Kobe King, it's going to be significant. But I also think that let's talk a little bit about what Manny Diaz can do to help that front 7. Maybe make it a front 8. Jair Brown is a different player this year. He was literally a lot of what he did last year was in the middle of the field, in center field as a ball hawk. But we've seen him mature and develop. He's gotten bigger and stronger. He is around the line of scrimmage. I expect that to continue against Michigan. I think he is a disruptive player and a guy who can go a long way towards maybe minimizing what Michigan can do on the ground. Because Penn State, I know that they haven't faced a lot of running teams. They faced Auburn, and everyone else kind of wanted to chuck it around. But they're only giving up like 78 yards a game, and that's really, really good. But I'm curious to see what Manny's going to do to help his front 7.
Yeah, I think it's going to be a really interesting matchup. Really, Penn State's biggest challenge to date from that standpoint, from a front seven and front eight standpoint, with when we talk about Jair Brown, and I think he's going to be key especially if they use him closer to the line of scrimmage as they've had this season. He's such a quick guy, and he's decisive in his. He's a sure tackler, but he's quick and decisive, making those decisions, cutting off angles, and bring guys down to the ground. And it's going to be huge against Blake Corum because, like I said, if he gets past that initial line of scrimmage and he gets through the D tackles and the D ends, he's so good at making guys miss and just getting to that second and third level. And then it's a touchdown. And in 4 seconds, see it. It's 7 points. And so that's where Jair Brown is going to come in huge. And then again, if they're able to really bottle that up, and they're not going to be able to bottle it up all day. Like Blake Corum, I think, is a good enough runner, and they have good enough offensive linemen where I think you're going to give up a play or two to them. But if you're able to, really limit them on the whole and not let them just run all over you, then really force the pressure on J.J. McCarthy because, last game against Indiana, that second half was the first time that he really had to go out and win them a game. I mean, it was 10-10 at Indiana. And then he really opened it up, had his first career 300-yard game, threw the ball for 30 times or more for the first time in his career. Prior to that, it was all like 24, 23 attempts. And so they were kind of keeping him, within what they wanted to do. They're very conservative look. And so if you're able to force him into, crisis or really in uncomfortable situations, I mean, that's when a guy like Joey Porter Jr., Kalen King, Zakee Wheatley, who's always around the ball, can make something happen. I think you need a turnover in this game if you're going to win it.
Yeah, let's just talk real briefly, Johnny. I don't know how you feel about this, but I know the Penn State fans are aware of it. James Franklin referenced it at the very start of his press conference. You mentioned that Indiana game and how they struggled a little bit early. Do you think it took Michigan's team, coaching staff, players more than a little bit to kind of find themselves and regain their footing after what happened with Mike Hart, their running backs coach, on the sideline? I think early in that game, he was kind of carted off. I believe what I saw was he had a seizure, but he's doing better. But you saw the images from that game. You saw some of the highlights, and it just looked like Michigan was really, they were really kind of knocked to their knees by watching. They had no idea. Mike Hart's also a great Michigan running back who played a while ago. I just wonder if maybe it took a little while. You mentioned it was 10-10. I wonder if they really had to kind of struggle to find themselves there in that second half.
Yeah, that could have certainly been the case. And that's one of those where James Franklin opened his press conference today, expressing, sending condolences and sending well wishes to Mike Hart and hoping that, he'll see him on Saturday if his conditions, well enough to return to the sideline with Michigan. And so that definitely could have played a factor. Even going back, though, a couple weeks before that to the Maryland game, I mean, that was one of those where, one possession game, 34-27, and Michigan through their first 3 games of the year, they just piled it on, 3 of the worst teams in college football. Colorado State, Hawaii, and UConn beat them like a combined, I think, 166-17. I was surprised it wasn't higher. I mean, those teams are so bad. And so, yes, you saw in that, okay, cool. Michigan can put up 50 on a bad team, and they definitely have the talent. This is not me saying, hey, they shouldn't be a top 10 team or anything like that. But I just think that, whether it was the Maryland game and if that the situation with Mike Hart, maybe that played into a little bit in terms of what Michigan was, trying to get going against Indiana. I just haven't been totally convinced that this is a legit top 5 team. So I don't know. I think we need to see more, and maybe they'll shut me up and win by 30 against Penn State. Maybe, you know what I mean? So maybe that happens. I think it's up to Penn State to go out and do the job, and I think this is going to be a tighter game than people think.
Yeah, right. The line. I mean, the betting line it opened at 7.5. It's at 7.
Yeah.
That's
the early line. The early line was 10.
Yeah. And I think whoever put that line out there is might regret that, because if that was an actual line, I think you had to jump on Penn State and 10, considering their defensive depth, considering their improved running game, considering the fact that they have one of the elite kicking specialists in the country to really flip the field. I mean, they have all the ingredients necessary to make the opponents really have to work to score. And if you're going to give them 10 points, that did seem like a little bit. I don't know. I mean, I guess 7. I thought it might be a little bit lower than 7, quite honestly, but the line hasn't moved much off 7, which is like a prime betting number. But one thing I wanted to circle back to with you, you mentioned the fact that Michigan actually dropped a spot from 4 to 5 because of the Indiana game, and we could talk a little bit about your ballot in a few minutes. But James Franklin is in his 9th year at Penn State, and Johnny, in my opinion, I think you can count on one hand. Maybe you don't even need 4 fingers and a thumb when you look at his signature wins at Penn State. Right? It's you got for me. You could count the Michigan win in 2017. I don't know how good that Michigan team was. The win to beat Ohio State at Beaver Stadium at 1 in 2016. And to win that one is 1. I think the Big Ten title game win over a pretty good Wisconsin team is another. But whenever Penn State, especially on the road, has gone up against a team that's pretty high in the rankings, it just hasn't gone well. So I think this is a big moment, not only for this Penn State team. I think it's a big moment for James and his coaching staff, and this is a test. You could say that maybe Michigan isn't really a top 5 team, and you might be right. But I mean, once you get past like Georgia and maybe a couple of, I don't know who is a top 5 team. It could be Penn State if they win this game. It really could. But this is a huge moment, a huge opportunity for Penn State, and I know they have 2 games that are really going to be tough after that. But just your thoughts on James Franklin against they've had some opportunities in 17 and 18 to really do some damage, and they haven't been able to do it. When you look at this Penn State team and the opportunity that presents itself if they can win this game, I think Michigan is a talented team. I don't know if they're a top 5 team, but a decisive win at Michigan really, really kind of changes everything for James Franklin and Penn State.
It definitely does. And you mentioned 17, 18. I always go back to those. It's just huge missed opportunities against Ohio State, blowing that lead in the shoe in 17 and then the 4th and 5. And, I'm sorry, Penn State fans. I know you don't want to relive those moments, but, missed opportunities there. But this is one that James Franklin can take. And it's not just this week. It's a 3-game stretch that will say a lot, I think, about where Penn State is as a program under James Franklin, and even, more specifically about Sean Clifford's legacy, because Sean Clifford and James Franklin are so closely intertwined, and the faith and the loyalty that Franklin has in him as a 6-year senior, as a 4-year starter. He's a guy that I don't want to say needs this win, but it's one of those where you look back on his career, and if you're able to go ahead on the road and beat, a Michigan team ranked inside the top 5, inside the top 10, excuse me, and go ahead and come out with that win, and then you go into Minnesota at home with the whiteout and Ohio State, I think this does a lot, if they're able to come away with this win, does a lot for James Franklin, does a lot for the fan base, kind of just reaffirming that, hey, this is a guy that can win these big games for us after it's been a few years. And then Sean Clifford just will do a lot for his confidence. I'm sure he hears everyone, I shouldn't say everyone, but a smattering of boos and at Beaver Stadium during the Northwestern game, and people calling for Drew Aller. And so I think this would do a lot for 2 of the biggest faces of Penn State's program right now if they're able to go ahead and win.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And when I think about Sean Clifford's career at Penn State and the games that he's played really well against good teams, in 2019, that Michigan team, that was a big moment for him. They won 28-21, but then they're unbeaten and they're ranked. I think they were top 5, top 3, maybe number 2. They go into Minnesota. That was a good Minnesota team. That was a team that was, that by the end of the year, they were no fun to play with. They had a lot of talent on that team, but Penn State fell behind early. The defense started slow. Sean threw a couple of picks, but they rallied, Johnny. They rallied in a difficult environment, and Sean had the offense driving at the end of the game. I think the final score was 31-26, but they came up empty. It wasn't just him, and that was really, I thought, to date, that was very much of a defining moment for Sean, and we really haven't seen, Penn State back in that situation, really, since then. You could say Iowa last year, but that wasn't a very good Iowa team, and I think Penn State was going to win that game before Sean got hurt, and they ended up losing it. This, to me, feels like one of the moments closest to that Minnesota opportunity that Penn State had with Sean, And I think that at the very least, he's going to have to play very well against this Michigan team. If they lose a close game, and a lot of things factor into that, but if Sean has an opportunity to play well and win this game, I think it's important that he does that. And I think, Penn State fans keep score, right? Let all fan bases do, but maybe none more so than Penn State. So if it comes down to a fourth quarter drive to win the game, I know Sean did it against Purdue. This is a little bit of a different animal, and I think we're gonna find out a lot about Penn State and Sean Clifford on Saturday.
Absolutely, and I think too we'll find out a lot about their freshmen. Like go down the complete opposite end, right, from the sixth-year senior to the freshman contributors. Nick Singleton and KeAndre Allen mentioned them earlier. I think they have an opportunity to really put their stamp, and this is one of those that they can say, welcome themselves to the Big Ten really in a major way. They scored a few touchdowns at Auburn. That was a really big moment for both of them, and a big occasion on CBS, national TV audience, all that. But to do it at the Big House would be huge for them as well. And it's not just those two. Yep. It's Abdul Carter. It's Zane Durant on the inside. It's Denai Dennis Sutton if he gets some run at the end, as we expect him to. It's Omari Evans if he gets a chance to play at wide receiver. Say KeAndre can't go, and he's asked to go ahead and make a play. I mean, these are guys that are going to be relied on for these big moments and these big games over the next few years, and they have an opportunity to really make their impact already. And so it's going to be up to James Franklin to have these guys ready. It's going to be up to Sean Clifford to not miss throws and stay on schedule. And if you have those 2-minute drill opportunities, especially at the end of the first half, in that middle 8, James Franklin likes to talk about, end of the first half, start of the second half. If you have opportunities to get on the board during that, Sean Clifford, you got to get the job done. And then the last time we saw KeAndre Allen and Nick Singleton, they were fumbling the ball, as was Kevon Lee, and the conditions. We talked about that with the Northwestern game. Everything, there was a lot that went into that. But this is a real opportunity for those two specifically to step up and have their welcome to the Big Ten moment.
Yeah. Johnny, one more thing I wanted to bring up before we get to your AP ballot and kind of what went into that here on the Blue White Breakdown is, for the Penn State fans that are not going to the game and you're going to watch it on TV, I think both of you would recommend that you watch, if you can, fans, watch the Michigan nose tackle in this game. You're gonna look at him, and if you look at the post-game stats, you might not see a lot of numbers associated with him. His name is Mazie Smith. He's about 6'4", 337 pounds, but he sets the table for a lot of what Michigan's going to do on defense. You really can't handle him one-on-one. He's that good. I think he might have been Johnny number 1 on Bruce Feldman's freaks list. If he wasn't, he wasn't far from number 1. But this guy, as good as PJ Mustipher is, I think Mazie Smith might even be, because PJ's coming off that knee, and I know that PJ is a phenomenal run stopper, and he occupies double teams. And he's a table setter, right, for Penn State's defense. Mazie Smith, even if he doesn't have a lot of disruptive plays, he could, but he could have a large say in this outcome. And I like Juice Scruggs a lot. I know Juice is going to get some help, but I think you and I are going to be looking at a lot. I want to see how good Mazie Smith is, because the NFL is drooling over this guy. He's not unlike Jordan Davis, right? Not unlike him. Maybe not quite the freak that Jordan Davis is, but this guy's close. Penn State fans, if you get a chance, just focus on the Michigan nose tackle, because he can do some things that not many people that are 337 pounds can do. I know, Johnny, I know you're impressed with him as well.
Well, remember Vita Vea, Bob?
Yeah.
For Washington in the Fiesta Bowl?
Yeah.
I mean, he's that kind of impact and that kind of athlete. And so that's why when I was going back and I was watching the Iowa game from a few weeks ago, Michigan played, you saw a lot of Iowa's success running the ball was off tackle, was on the outside, and so that's why I think you're going to have few and far between runs just right up the middle, or trying to hit that A gap, because he's right there. He is right there, and so that's why I think this is an opportunity maybe for Nick Singleton. Yeah. We saw him bounce a couple and hit a few at Auburn and even against Ohio. This could be one where it's like, hey, maybe that's more of an emphasis. It's just staying away from the interior of Michigan's defensive line and leaning on Olu and Caden and even Brenton Strange as a seal blocker to create opportunities on the outside, because yeah, he really does have a lot of vita vea in him. And yeah, I mean, as an Eagles fan, I like what Jordan Davis has been able to do. I'm sure there are Penn State fans who are going to be watching this guy and being, having like those flashbacks, like what Jordan Davis has done so far with the Eagles and at Georgia.
Yeah, so between P.J. Mustipher and Mazie Smith, we're talking about 650 pounds of talented defensive tackle, and they're both going to have, I think, both going to play big roles in this game. But if we look at the stat sheet, you're going to think, wow, where were they? I don't see a lot of production, but they do things that, to the naked eye, you don't always see it. It's hard to really focus on them when you're trying to watch the ball, but they are causing all kinds of problems. I guarantee you, the centers and guards on both teams know all about Mustipher and Mazie Smith, and I know that that's going to be something that they're probably – I don't know if they're going to have restless nights sleeping on Friday night, but they're not going to face any defensive tackles much better than those two. I'm going to try and watch both those guys, but they're going to be really, really, I think, key factors. Johnny, where did you kind of fit your Associated Press ballot? So you had a Penn State team that didn't play, and I know that you've written about it, but for the listeners and the viewers that didn't get a chance to see it, it runs every Sunday. It's must-read stuff. Hopefully you guys are reading about it, but if you haven't, check it out. But Johnny, you had to deal with a Penn State team that was number 10 and then was coming off a bye. They don't play. Michigan wins by 21 on the road at number 4, but they actually come down a spot. So just your thoughts on both teams and how you kind of assembled your ballot.
Yeah, Bob, thanks for the plug. I appreciate that. Yeah, it's so I had Michigan dropping a few spots, and now I had them 5 last week, and so I dropped them from 5 to 8. And it was more so like, I mean, there are things that the other teams have done, like Tennessee winning the way they did at LSU, and Tennessee's really impressed me all year. So I had Clemson 4, Tennessee 5, and then I kept USC at 6. And I think Oklahoma State's schedule and what they've been able to do so far, their resume is better than what Michigan has done. And again, that's what happens if you're Michigan and you schedule those 3 non-conference cupcakes to start off the season. But I had them up high because I did, and I still do believe in the talent that they have, and both on the offensive and defensive side of the ball, special teams as well. But I've just been waiting for them to really just what they did to Colorado State, go do to Indiana or go do to Maryland at home. And really, after not seeing that after 3 weeks, even the Iowa game was, they only scored 27 points. It was, Iowa's a good defense, and that's kind of what Iowa likes to do. They like to muck it up a little bit. Right. But I just haven't seen that dominance out of Michigan over the last few weeks. And so that's why I moved them back a few spots. I kept Penn State at 10. That's where I had them previous weeks. Look, they're on the bye. They're not going to move up. They're not going to move back. So I felt safe putting them there just behind Ole Miss.
Very nice. And I know I'm just going to ask, because we're going to get to them in a couple weeks. When you kind of look at the Ohio State team, right, and kind of what obviously the offense is, they have depth, and it's been on display at receiver and at running back early in the season. They have, I think, maybe a much better coordinated defense. They've always had some athletes, but sometimes whether it's the scheme and what Oregon was able to do to them last year and what Michigan was able to do to them. Just real quick, have you noticed a lot different in this Ohio State team, or is it too early to tell? Or are you going to just kind of wait until they descend in State College in a couple of weeks?
Look, I've been impressed from what I've seen, but even them, it's like the Notre Dame win earlier in the year. You think, okay, well, that's a good win still to beat Notre Dame week 1. And it's not a bad win, but then you go ahead and see what Notre Dame did, losing to Marshall. And of course, Notre Dame ends up rebounding at BYU. You can keep going, through all this, but Ohio State, I still think needs to prove it a little bit. I like what CJ Stroud has done. Travion Henderson is a beast. Jackson Smith and Jigba has missed quite a bit of time, but him getting back, he seems like he'll be getting back and fully healthy and everything in that offense by time they roll into State College for that game. I cannot wait for that matchup, really, between Ohio State's wide receivers and this secondary that Penn State has. It's going to be great. So I did consider dropping Alabama from number 1 this week. I kept them there, though, just because I figured, hey, look, they didn't have Bryce Young when it came down to the last play, though, against Texas A&M. So I figured, hey, I'll keep him at 1, and if Bryce Young plays next week, great. If he doesn't and they lose to Tennessee, well, then that's what they are, right? They don't have Bryce Young for a few weeks, and that'll kind of take care of itself. But It's a shame that we'll be working during the bye week. It would have been nice to have the Tennessee Alabama game during the bye week, Bob, because I think that's gonna be a great game. So I think that's at 3:30 though, right?
I believe that is right. Johnny, let's be honest. You're so focused on the Eagles and the Phillies right now. I'm sure eventually you will rewatch some of these games, but as long as the Eagles are on Sundays and the Phillies are now, as we talk about it, one closer step maybe to a World Series berth. They still got to deal with Atlanta, and eventually I have a feeling it's going to be the Dodgers if they get by Atlanta. You must. I know you're loving this life, but it's gotta be murder on your prep time for Penn State football. I know you're probably burning the midnight oil because there's a lot in your life you got to get to, and you really have to manage your time. Tell me I'm wrong.
Yeah, look, readers, listeners, take solace and know that the Eagles and the Phillies have not taken away from
I know
for this Michigan game. It is the utmost importance. I cannot wait for this game Saturday at the Big House. It's been a few years since I've been back, so I am really looking forward to this matchup. I'm also, I also really like watching the Eagles stay undefeated, and the Phillies doing what they're doing in the postseason. The Fightins are getting it done, and we're gonna have a fun little matchup Sunday night, Bob. Cowboys.
I am aware that is a game where I just think that I am stunned by Dallas's. I don't call it a resurgence, but after they lost Dak and they scored 3 points at home against Tampa, I was like, man, this could just get ugly. But the backup Cooper has played well, but man, I knew the defense was legit. I think I even told you that early in the year. But holy hell, like those guys, as good as if you're a football purist, the matchup between Dallas's defense and this Penn State or this Philadelphia Eagles combination of the O-line, the skill talent, and the quarterback who is a true dual threat. I mean, there's gonna be some tense moments, I think, throughout this game. I think Philly's probably the more complete team, but that Dallas defense is capable of taking this team a long way. It's a divisional game. Micah's coming home to Pennsylvania. I don't think Micah gets embarrassed very well. I think this is going to be a game that's going to hang in the balance. I'm really excited for it. I'd like to have Dak back, but you can't have everything. It's going to be a wild weekend with Michigan, Penn State. In Michigan, you and I will be there. And then between you, me, and Greg Pickle, who's one of the biggest Philly Eagles fans I've ever met, it's going to be quite the Sunday night. I know you're really pumped about it too.
It's going to be a big Penn State on Penn State matchup too. Some Nittany Lion on Nittany Lion crime between Micah and Miles Sanders, because Miles he's been playing really well for the Eagles. He's one of the leaders in the league with rushing as well. Saquon Barkley looking like his old self for the Giants, the 4-1 Giants.
Yeah,
who would have thought that? But yeah, some good some Penn State products playing well in the league, and a lot to watch this weekend, Bob. A lot to watch, unless you're a Steelers fan, which is unfortunate.
Well, it all starts with for you, it starts with the Phillies, but it all starts for Penn State fans at high noon on Saturday. It's Penn State at number 5, Michigan. We'll see how it plays out. We'll be at the game. Make sure you check out our coverage. Johnny and Dustin are doing a podcast later in the week. Dave Jones and I will have a podcast hopefully in a day or two. We'll get Dave's thoughts, but it's a great week. It's actually the start of a 3-game stretch that I think that if you're a Penn State football fan, based on what you've seen, I think you're really excited about this stretch. But really, if they beat Michigan, then holy mackerel! If you're a Penn State fan and you happen to also be from Philadelphia, between Penn State, the Eagles, and the Phillies, like it doesn't line up any better than that. Am I right, Johnny?
You are right indeed, Bob. I'm looking forward to this weekend. It's gonna be great.
All right, guys. We'll be back next week to talk about all things Penn State and Philadelphia sports as well. But we'll be back to talk about it next week.